Hello, I'm Stephen Rakusik with South Dakota Public Broadcasting.
And I'm Dale Droege, a professor of biology at Dakota State University.
Today we're actually going to dissect the earthworm, which is found pretty much everywhere in South Dakota.
pretty much throughout South Dakota, even though most of them have moved in since European settlement. The ice ages tend to push them out, but a very common animal, pretty much everybody's familiar with.
As far as finding these, for dissections, of course, you would not want to find them and dissect them, but if you're looking at just observing them, where would you find?
Well, yeah, you can find them
probably
probably in any compost pile or in a yard, something like that. Now, in the winter time, of course, then it's much difficult, and you can order them from biological supply houses and other things, and they're fairly inexpensive. During the fishing season, of course, you can get them at bait stores and places like that.
I don't know if it's a rumor or not, but I've been told if you have a real bumpy yard, that's a possibility of a sign of a lot of earthworms.
Well, I guarantee you have earthworms in your yard. It's just a question of how hard you're willing to look for them.
Okay.
But if you water the lawn, it'll usually come to the surface.
Awesome. We have actually a couple here that we actually, it's fishing season, so we picked up a couple of these just to look at. And you're going to point out a couple characteristics of just looking at these?
Yeah,
these are live ones here.
Yeah, just looking at them, you can see, of course, first of all, you can see how moist their skin is, and that's one of the important things about earthworms is that they breathe through their skin. The gas exchange occurs to skin, and in order to do that, that surface must be moist. So you often see earthworms, they seem kind of slimy to us. They have mucus and things that protect that outside, but also keep it moist. And another reason why you only find them in moist environments.
Like once in a while you see them on a sidewalk or driveway and they seem out of place.
Yeah,
get
we're
caught
not
there?
going to live there very long. If they're probably moving after a rain or something like that, and they're moving very quickly because it is a life-threatening situation for them.
Okay, so what's some things we should notice right away?
First of all, let's look at the motion first. You can see this one earthworm here is moving really well. First of all, one of the most important things about earthworms evolutionarily is that their body is segmented. That is, it's a series of repeating parts. And one of the important advantages of segmentation is that it allows a great deal more control of locomotion in the body. And so now segments can be moving independently. So circular muscles are contracting in some segments, elongating the body, and in others, the longitudinal muscles are contracting, shortening the segment. And so some segments are elongating, some segments are shortening, all at the same time. And it creates that kind of inchworm or seesaw kind of motion we associate with worms like this. But you can see they're moving with real purpose and direction.
Absolutely.
There's a head here, even though it's not a well-defined head as we think about them.
I was just going to ask that, as far as a nervous system with a brain and nerves?
They have a very small brain. It's more for sensory things, but pretty much each segment has its own little nervous control center.
Okay.
And so that's how this locomotion is occurring. So they're moving. You can see here elongation, contraction, and then some parts of the worm can be backing up while some parts of it are going in a certain direction.
So I'm going to cover this. It seems a little dry here. I'll cover him up a little bit. So I said him now.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, we're kind of consider that with earthworms, but earthworms are hermaphrodites, or in technical terms, monoecious. They have both male and female reproductive structures. So they produce sperm and they produce eggs, but they do not self-fertilize. They'll have to mate with another worm. They exchange sperm essentially with another worm, store that sperm, and then use it to fertilize their eggs. And
you said before, it looks like it is a slippery surface.
Yes.
So what allows them to grab a hold and move?
Yeah, and that's the glove's a little difficult, but on the bottom side, the ventral side of earthworms, there's a series of brush-like seta.
Okay.
And you can feel those.
Absolutely.
They're like little bristles. And you can feel them, especially if these living ones, you could use gloves, you could use your fingers, but even through the gloves, you can feel those.
Absolutely. It's almost like a comb or a brush.
Right. And so those little brush-like structures grab the surface, act like little anchors. And so you can kind of watch, it's a little hard to see here, but as they move forward, as they elongate the body, they'll lift their body up off the ground and then put it down and pull forward like that.
And almost like they're going to right themselves, like in the situation here.
Yeah, they have, they don't move quickly, but they have that they're really agile in many ways. I mean, there's certainly complex motion in how tightly they turn and which directions they move. So they're really, segmentation was an important advantage in locomotion, and the advent of segmentation was an important step in the evolution of animal body plans, and it's picked up also by insects and vertebrates and other animals like that.
A couple more questions before we actually dissect the one that's not the one that's preserved. I noticed, we have you said the head side here, the anterior side, it moves back. There's an enlargement here, then it moves back to the rest. What's that enlargement?
Yeah, there are very few things to see externally on an earthworm, the segments, but another one is this band that light-colored band that's closer to the anterior end. This is called the clitellum, and the clitellum is a reproductive structure. It produces a mucousy slime tube, which becomes the cocoon. And so when they are getting ready to reproduce, they produce this cocoon. It slides forward. The eggs are deposited into it. The sperm from the mating partner are deposited into it. And then those fertilized eggs slip off in this cocoon into the soil.
Thank you for pointing out. I did notice there's some structures below here, kind of reproductive type organs in the front.
Yeah, these would be reproductive. You can see these white structures. These would be where sperm would enter and where the eggs would be deposited into the cocoon. And so the soil's probably literally full of these kind of earthworm cocoons. Most of us have probably eaten some of these earthworm cocoons at one time or another when you get dirt in your mouth from your fingers or playing or gardening or whatever the case may be. But luckily they won't hurt you.
Okay. Another question would be like, what's the use for? What are these useful for us at all?
Yeah, earthworms have a tremendous effect on the ecology because they are burrowers and they are so-called deposit feeders. They eat soil, essentially. Soil passes through their digestive tract. They digest out the organic molecules in that. And so by doing that, by moving through the soil, they loosen up the soil, they aerate it, they create aeration parts, they break down the nutrients and make those available in other forms. So yeah, soil that has not been worked by earthworms is a much denser, less well-drained type of soil. So earthworms play a major role in keeping our soil fertile.
Awesome. Well, we should go ahead and dissect. I'm going to pull these off to the side here.
So those are the external structures. Say externally, there really isn't much to look at on an earthworm. Just we can see it here on this one. Here's the clitellum, and you can see the rings, the segmentation. And when you're getting ready to dissect your earthworm, it's best to have those seta, that ventral surface, down. And so you'll look at this earthworm, and you can usually kind of see it, the preserved earthworm, but you can't even feel those seta where the bristles are along the bottom. And the clitellum has a little bit more of a break where on the ventral side, and so you want that side down. Usually works best. And I've also found, because you're going to need some pins, that's if things are, and I usually have the best luck doing this when I pin right at the mouth area, the anterior area.
And we find that, you mentioned, because it's closer to the
it's closer to the clitellum. It's also a little more expanded, you can see. And then you pin it and kind of keep it some tension on it, kind of keep it stretched out. That's going to help you cut through the various segments.
Now, some other dissections we were doing, like with the crayfish with regeneration.
Yeah.
With these type of animals, if they ever get cut,
they
damaged?
can regenerate. I'm not sure it can remember. I think usually the anterior end would regenerate, say, a new posterior end. I don't believe a posterior end can regenerate a new anterior end. There's too many, structures.
Absolutely.
But to do this, you're going to need something really sharp. So a scalpel or one-sided razor blade would probably work too. But you do need something that can cut a pretty fine line. And most of the structures to look at in the earthworm are in this anterior third or half of the animal. So what I usually do is start here in the middle of the worm.
And how deep are we going to go here?
Just beneath the surface. Next, you want to be kind of careful here. You don't want to cut into the intestine if you can't help it. So
and how are we going to know if we do that?
You'll see dirt. Basically, it's because you'll hit into things there.
Okay.
So you just create a little, you can see, I'm kind of cutting real delicately along here. And what's interesting about the earthworm is every one of these segments has an interior curtain of tissue. There's a flap of tissue called the septum, singular, that holds it together. So to spread this earthworm out, you're actually going to have to go in and, press this down and kind of cut along the sides here to cut those septa, so you can flatten this earthworm out.
So you're saying start in the middle kind of as practice before you
kind of get it started, and then you can extend the cut anteriorly.
Okay.
So I usually try to get this. You can see it's kind of separating away, and then use the pins to push that back.
Also mentioned to make sure reinforce to the kids that sharp scalpel, sharp pins.
Yeah, you want to be careful. You got to do this, and if you do crunch down, and it isn't a tragedy to hit the like you say, to hit the intestine at this point.
Chances are you might, throughout the dissection, you might hit that a few times.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've been doing these a lot of years, and I hit the intestine fairly routinely, but you just get it. And see there, I'm a little deep. See a little dirt.
Absolutely, yeah.
But so you just kind of want to get that started, because the intestine pretty much runs the length of the animal, so he really doesn't. What you really want to get is up here a little bit more.
The choice is then probably the scalpel more so than the scissors?
Yeah, scissors would be almost useless, I think, in this. So you kind of get that, you kind of start to peel that back, and you can even use the pin sometimes to go in there and kind of clean some of those septa back and fold that body wall back.
I always remember telling kids too, if you see something that looks like something, don't cut it.
Yeah, well, it's always a good rule of thumb. That's right. Any structure that looks different, that looks...
One thing amazing about nature is that usually parts of nature look like something.
Yeah.
There's a structure function.
Yeah.
So you'll be able to see definitely when you get a little closer to the anterior end, some definite differences.
Yeah, so we see we can kind of cut those septa there as we pull that back. This is still the intestine. Tubular intestine runs the entire length of the body. Basically a complete digestive system, right. A mouth and an anus, so the food flowing through it in one direction.
So ours is all confined within the cavity.
Right, ours is confined within the body cavity,
length.
and theirs is spread out in a much longer. Now see, I hit the...
Any kind of a skeletal system here at all?
Nope. Everything is based on fluid, so they have what's called a hydrostatic skeleton where the fluid things are. I think, for the interest of time now, we'll switch over. So you kind of get the idea, and I just want to keep extending that cut anteriorly.
I'll change it here, Dale.
Slide this one over here. Yeah, and here's one we've dissected out previously, just to save time. And now you can see, here's the intestine as it comes forward. It's just a straight tube. There isn't much room in the body for anything else.
You can also see those little segments in there too, if you look at it.
Yeah,
close.
and you can see the septa here that divide the segments. So the earthworm is this almost like a freight train kind of model. It's just a series of identical segments, pretty much running all the way back.
Which makes sense if it's going to be a fluid type of a skeleton. You almost want it
segmented. The fluid. Yeah, you got the fluid within each one, and when it squeezes, only that segment's going to be affected.
Absolutely.
I guess let's start with probably the simplest system is the digestive system. This straight tube running through the body. At the anterior end, the very tip next to the mouth, is what's called the pharynx, or it's kind of like a throat. And so it swallows the food. Muscular propulsion swallows the dirt, in this case, pushes it through the esophagus, which is underneath this tissue, a little hard to see. And that goes back to this structure right here. This little gray colored structure is a thin-walled crop. And it's much like the vertebrate stomach. So it's where they store food, it expands and stores the food, where it can then pass into a very important structure. Right there is the thicker walled muscular gizzard. And the gizzard, with its muscular contractions, crushes, mixes up the food, breaks it down into finer pieces that can then be digested more easily in the intestine. So food passes from the pharynx through the esophagus, to the crop, where it's stored, into the gizzard, where it's ground and processed, and then all the way down this intestine, where it's broken down into small enough pieces that can be absorbed into the bloodstream and circulate throughout the animal.
What's kind of nice about this is, as far as looking at future dissections, even looking at the human anatomy, we have things like pharynx, we have things like esophagus.
Yeah, it's showing the same basic structure. And what it is, and again, we talked about that complete digestive system, moving the food through in one direction. Now areas can kind of specialize. It's like a factory, where, at the beginning of building a car, somebody's, welding the chassis or putting on the wheels or something. At the end, they're, maybe putting in the windshield or doing something like that. So you can specialize in one particular task, because that food only passes that way once, and it's at a certain stage in its preparation. So early on, you're storing and processing. Later in the digestive tract, you're breaking it down, digesting and absorbing.
And one thing too, I always remembered is like the gizzard. Think about if you ever go to a restaurant, you can order gizzards. They're really hard and rubbery, and they're
very muscular,
hard to eat.
Yeah.
And if you're looking to find a location spot, you can actually hit with the probe. You actually can find that spot very easily.
Yeah, you can tell the difference between the crop is more anterior to the gizzard, but the crop, you can push on it. It's much more thin-walled and squishy. And the gizzard, when you push on it, you'll feel that it's much thicker walled and heavier. Yep. And the digestive tract is really one of the major features in the segmentation of the earthworm. There are a few other interesting parts. The circulatory system has the dorsal aorta, which is the blood vessel flowing, this dark line coming across the top. That one might have it a little bit better. Yeah, let's take
a couple different ones here. This one had real nice, I think, aortic arches you're mentioning.
Yeah,
too.
yeah. Yeah, let's take a look at this one. So here's the dorsal blood vessel coming along the top. Here's the gizzard again, and the crop is showing up a little differently here. And as that blood vessel, the dorsal blood vessel provides much of the pumping power, the pressure to push that blood forward. And then when it reaches the esophagus area, it goes down to the ventral side through these aortic arches, and they're showing up here as these dark structures. And people call these hearts, and they're even labeled in books as hearts, but I've always been a little cautious about that because they're not hearts, they're not pumping blood in the sense that we think of as a heart doing. Most of that pressure is coming from the dorsal aorta. These kind of keep the blood, they kind of maintain pressure. They act like regulators more than that.
Would you compare this more to like a hard pumping system like ours, or more like our lymphatic system, where it's more the muscle contractions, or a combination of both?
Well, it's a combination of both. It is a closed, earthworms do have a closed circulatory system. One of the only vertebrates, or the only other animal that really have an efficient closed circulatory system. And the pressure, most of the pressure comes though from this tubular, you can think of it like a tubular heart. It's a long tube that presses and pushes the blood forward. So you see those, so you should be able to see the dorsal aorta fairly clearly. You should be able to see these aortic arches surrounding the esophagus there.
So we have, how about any kind of nervous system you mentioned? Or some kind of nerve?
And then back here, in this case now you see I removed a section of the intestine. So on the ventral surface, near the belly, is the nerve cord. And here you can see it, a thin white line, just looks like a nerve, looks like a little cable, which essentially is what a nervous system is. A nervous system is cabling, transmitting, messages from one part of the animal to another. And if you look real, sometimes you can even see kind of in the segment, each segment kind of has a little swelling or nerve center with nerves radiating out from that. Let's take a look at that other one again. Okay. I think he showed the reproductive system. And so we've seen some, structures of the digestive system, we've seen circulatory system, nervous system, muscular system to some extent. And now probably the last thing is the reproductive system. Again, remember earthworms are hermaphrodites. They produce both male and female gametes. And these large globular white structures, they're probably one of the most prominent structures. Students will probably ask you first about these. These are the seminal vesicles. And seminal vesicles store sperm that the worm makes itself. So underneath that, lying down in there, are the testes, producing sperm that are then stored in here. And it's very difficult to find the testes in a dissection like this. So usually you just say, okay, these are the seminal vesicles. This is where the worm stores its own sperm.
That's a good point. One thing we should mention right there too is that a lot of times in these books you have these perfect diagrams. Yeah. Very seldom is it ever looked at.
Yeah, the ovaries are actually right behind here too, and they're very difficult to find. Occasionally they just look like little teardrops, and occasionally you'll see one, but I think it's difficult to assign it as an acquired type of thing. And then real interestingly, again, in these hermaphrodites, just to anterior to the seminal vesicles are these tiny little, they look more spherical, kind of round-like structures right there and there. There's two on each side. These are the seminal receptacles. And as the name implies, receptacles, they receive the sperm from the other worms. So when the worms are mating, the sperm is passed from the seminal vesicles of one worm, swims externally into the seminal receptacles of the other worm.
And that'd be during that time when that cocoon is being released?
Well, it's usually actually before that. Worms actually, the mating can actually take place at a much different time than fertilization. They can store it. It's kind of a hard thing to understand. It's kind of an unusual system.
So they'll store it, and then at some point later,
when the conditions are right,
they can release.
Right, release the cocoon, release the eggs into it. The sperm are released into it from the seminal receptacle. The fertilized eggs pass into the cocoon, or off the worm in the cocoon.
So develop completely separate from the original parent?
Yeah, once the cocoons, they'll hatch and little worms emerge. They don't really have a larval stage. The little worms look like adult worms, and there's no parental care or anything like that. So again, the seminal vesicles, seminal receptacles, main parts of the reproductive system. That's probably about most of the structures you're going to see on the earthworm. But again, humble worms, we don't think about them eating dirt and all that, but they represent, several important trends in animal evolution, which is, the changes in the digestive tract, the development of specialized structures for handling food at particular areas. We see a more sophisticated nervous system with this segmented body and the way the body moves. They are very important animals, and they are a very important part of our ecology.